I'm local democracy reporter Emma Draper, and by now you've probably heard and seen stories about the upcoming local authority elections in April. Most of us only care about our commissioners or council when the rates bill drops through the letterbox, they decide to build an expensive community centre or stop paying into a civic amenity site. Of course, local authorities do a lot more than that and make decisions which affect the day-to-day lives of most of us here. Dog poo bylaws, social housing and bin collection schedules. In theory, these should be reasons enough for us to care about what our local politicians are doing, but historically there is low interest and low turnout in these elections. So, why would anyone want to stand for the role and why should we care about them? Well, the good news for anyone with those questions is you're about to find out. I've spoken to a few people with the answers, and we'll start with the leader of Douglas Council, Claire Wells.
So why did I want to be a councillor? It actually was an accident, to be perfectly honest with you. I got involved with some stuff at my son's school, which got me in touch with one of the local MHKs, which in turn then there was a by-election at the time, and this particular MHK said, I really think you should do this. I'd never really thought about it in the past and fell into it and discovered some passions that I just didn't know existed, to be honest with you.
So how have you been finding it? Is it what you expected the role to be like? Like, did it live up to what you thought initially?
I think fortunately for me, I think there was zero expectation, and I kind of just went in to see what I could do and what I could achieve. As time goes on, I think you learn so much. I think a lot of people come in and they think they can change the world tomorrow, and I think that is just incredibly unrealistic because things take time and it's really, really slow. But we do make progress, and I think you have to be here for a good while to see the fruits of your labours. And I think a couple of the things I'm just really, really proud of is the listed apartments that are coming online now. When I first started in the council nearly 9 years ago now, or knocking on the door of 10 even, that was in its infancy, but this year we're going to see that come to fruition, and that's a really, really proud moment. You know, we work a lot with, for me in particular, because I was chair for housing and I get involved with housing, the changes that we've seen in there have taken years, but they are so wonderful to see because it's such a great department. The service that they provide is amazing. So I think if you're coming in and you think, well, I'm going to change everything overnight, it just doesn't happen. So having that expectation that you can make a difference, you need to persevere and you need to have the patience in order to get that to happen.
If someone is thinking of standing, what advice would you give them?
I would totally recommend speaking to a current council member so that you can understand what it involves. You know, it does take up a lot of time. You get people from the public that speak to you and understanding what you can and can't do, where your responsibilities lie. And I think you've always got to remember that as soon as you're a council member, you are a representative of Douglas and you're no longer somebody who can go on Facebook or Twitter or any of these things and just say whatever you like. You've always got that presentation that you are part of the council. I highly recommend it if you are passionate about where you live, you want to make a change, even though I've said earlier on that, you know, change takes time. If you're passionate about that and you want to see change or you want to help improve the environment within which you live, this is the grassroots of that. You know, it's great being an MHK and that's like different level. But for me, being a council member touches the vast majority of people in your constituency. You have an impact on them every single week, every single day. Something you do or something that the council does touches their lives. And I think that's incredibly important for us to make sure that the public are represented in the way that we want to. And if you're one of those people that is passionate about that, then this is the place to be.
But there are other local authorities which need people to stand, including in Ramsey, where Lamara Craine has announced she won't be standing again, leaving an additional seat after Commissioner Steve Kelly passed away last year. She's also wanting to encourage more women to stand for the role.
Unfortunately, it's been a really poor uptake. Not many people seem that interested in becoming a commissioner, and it's really sad and it's really depressing actually that basically so many people, you know, want to complain, want to moan, want to whine about what happens in their town and how it could be run better, but they're not willing to do anything for themselves and they're not willing to volunteer their own time to do it. So it's all great, really, you know, criticising people that do that, and I take a lot of that criticism, but nobody else is willing to do it. So we really do need to see people, especially the ones that are so vocal and have such large opinions, come forward, put their money where their mouth is and stand forward as a commissioner.
Is there a reason why you're stepping down in particular? Is there a reason why you stood down essentially that is making you want to try and encourage more people to stand?
So my intention is probably not to stand in the April election. That's where 90% of my brain is right now. I've done 3 years. I've worked really hard. I've tried to do my best. It's affected me. It's affected my mental health. It's affected my career. It's affected my personal life. So, you know, I have taken a lot on in that respect. And some people may find that it's an easier role for them, that they don't, have as much of a negative effect on their lives as it has on mine. But I want to be honest, I want to be open. It has, and it is difficult taking on the challenge of being commissioner and dealing with the public. But you don't necessarily have to put yourself out like I have done. I often, engage in heated debates, and that takes its toll. But I think that a lot of people can potentially manage that a lot better. So I think they should.
And what made you want to be a commissioner in the first instance? Have you realised it's not all it was supposed to be, or what you thought it would be?
I really wanted to get involved in local politics because I've always been a keen, avid political commentator ever since I was at college. And I remember the first Iraq war, and I've always wanted to be involved, and it was on a global scale. But then I realised that actually my town needs me and I have to start somewhere. And that was what I wanted to do, is to make a change where I could. I knew I couldn't change global politics, and I knew I couldn't change people's minds on that kind of scale, but I can make a difference to my town and I can make things better there. And if I see those little changes and I feel that there is progress being made, then I feel like I've achieved something. And I think that is what people should think about. What difference can you make? So one thing that I was pleased about at my becoming a commissioner presentation was the vast majority of the people that came along were women. Now, being the only female commissioner on the board for nearly 3 years, I was really pleased to see that engagement with women. I feel we're underrepresented. I feel like we desperately need that diversity, that representation on the board. I would love plenty more women to come and stand forward. And if women are interested in getting involved in politics, please reach out to me. You don't have to hold the same opinions as me. You don't have to be a Green Party member. You don't have to necessarily even like me, but get involved and reach out to me and I can help that happen. I can point you in the right direction.
And also in Garff, which is now made up of 3 areas, Laxey, Lonnon and Macclesfield. The merger means the commissioners are the largest by land size and use services in both the north and the east. The new authority boundaries were approved in 2015, and in the last local authority elections, which we'll get onto in a little bit, only had voters going to the polls in the Lonnon ward. Melanie Christian says taking on the voluntary role can be a challenge, and candidates will need to develop a thick skin when faced with criticism about decisions made. Commissioners aren't paid for the work they do, but can claim expenses for attending meetings and going to external committees and boards. Mrs. Christian says finding a balance between working full-time and family commitments is important.
I guess really just to give something back to the community, just to be a part of Lonnon, although obviously not from the Isle of Man. I've lived here for over 20 years. My children have been born and brought up here and feel very passionate about the local area that we live in and doing my little bit to help, really.
How have you found it? And was it what you expected it to be when you signed up and when you joined?
On the whole, I'd say yes. It's obviously like doing anything, I guess, over a few years. It has its ups and downs. It has been, I would say, in some ways more time consuming than I perhaps anticipated. So how I manage my time, I work full time as well, is I usually spend my Sunday afternoons looking at the agendas before the meetings and going through all the planning applications. And if I have any questions from constituents, I try and answer them straight away as I go through, really, because juggling, obviously, work and family and being a commissioner and making sure I sort of give, good attention to all of them really can sometimes be a bit of a juggle.
What advice would you give them? Obviously, you balance a full-time job and you're a parent as well. So how do you factor all of that in, and what advice would you give people who are maybe in the same situation?
Well, like I said, I just set aside time during my week for being sort of commissioner things and catching up on emails and so on and the agenda before meetings. I would say for anyone thinking about being a commissioner to double check you're registered on the electoral register. And if you contact your local authority clerks or office, they can check that for you. And then follow the process. And there's information on the government website about becoming a commissioner. You have to make sure, I think you need a proposer and a seconder and 8 nominees for your nomination form, and I think that has to be handed in about 3 weeks before the elections. But I would say to anyone who's thinking about doing it, go for it. I think we need more people putting themselves forward as commissioners. We need more diversity. It would be great to see more women in the role of commissioners and just people playing their part in their community.
What was unexpected about the role? Is there anything that you thought, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd be doing this?
Well, I guess like anything in public service now, you are putting yourself above the parapet, as it were, and you are putting yourself forward. And particularly, I think, with the internet and social media, undoubtedly you will face criticism for your decisions, and you have to develop sometimes quite a thick skin or be quite confident in your decisions that you're doing the right thing and the reasons behind that. And that can sometimes take a little bit of adjustment. I have made mistakes along the way, but we just do our best really as we can as a board.
During the last 4 years, Peel has had a number of developments approved, including a new sewage treatment works. Sewage and beach water quality has been at the top of plenty of election manifestos for prospective town representatives, but other issues, including getting doctors' appointments, regularly arise. Former MHK and now Commissioner Ray Harmer says being a commissioner means putting the people first and not your own ambition.
I think Commissioner was always where I was really at in many respects, because that's when I first became a Commissioner, it was really out of a really desire to put back into the community and not be part of the community. And I was very sort of conscious your days can go to work and come back, but are you actually inputting or influencing or helping out in the community? So, and there's a number of different routes that you can use. You can be a school governor, and this one was very much one that came to mind. And in many respects, it was a number of people who said, because I did some youth work, this might be a really good route, something that you'd be really valued for you to do. And it was really from that point of view. So there's really a desire of just being, because you can live in a community but let everything pass you by in a way and not contribute in terms of the facilities and the events and all those kind of things that happen. It's just really to be part of Peel, obviously being, because I lived there, just being passionate about what it's like to be there and how I can help. And it really fits in with all of the other things that I do, whether it's the Men in Sheds or Centenary Centre or Heritage Trust or so forth. It's just about just being part of Peel really and being part of all that we do.
How did you find then rejoining the board or rejoining Peel Commissioners after you'd been away for a little while? Do you think like things have changed since you were previously a commissioner and things have moved on, or do you think things are actually, they're kind of just the same as what they were when I was last in the role previously? How did you find that?
It's different. I mean, in some ways it's exactly the same. It's like you never left. In some ways it's very different. I mean, it's slightly different when you're in a sort of chairman role, and it does take time to sort of get back up to speed. And also you need time to, if you like, things don't sort of tend to happen overnight. You need time to actually bed in, you're trying to achieve. But in many respects, I would say, actually, it was just like going back, like nothing had changed in many respects. So people change, but the sort of issues that you're dealing with don't.
Hello, if you've made it through this far, well done. Or if you're just tuning in, I'm local Democracy Reporter Emma Draper, and I've been speaking to a few commissioners and a councillor about why we should care about the local authority elections. So far, we've covered why people should be a commissioner or a councillor, and in the second half, we'll be hearing from a couple of MHKs about their experience as a commissioner and why they made the jump to becoming a member of Tynwald, as well as voter apathy and the 2021 local elections. But first, the important information. If any of this has made you think, actually, I'd like to give it a go and be a commissioner, there's a few things you need to do ahead of April. You must be registered to vote on the electoral register. That's the most important bit and should be done by the 24th of February. This is to make sure that the rest of the forms are submitted at the correct times. The nomination period opens on the 13th of March, which is when you'll be able to get forms, and those must be submitted by the 19th of March. You also need to be over 18 and be a British citizen or have the right to remain on the island, ordinarily a resident on the island and be so for a period of or amounting to 5 years or more. If this year you're just planning on voting, then you should also be registered to vote on the electoral register by the 25th of March. And if any of your details have changed, for example if you've moved house, you must update this on the electoral register. More information about the local authority elections can be found on the government website, including links to forms and nomination papers. Now, there have also been a number of by-elections since 2022. Portaran, Port St Mary, Patrick, Peel, Michael, Onken, Ramsey, Lezayre and Andreas. Patrick, Peel and Andreas had uncontested by-elections in that time, which means those who applied joined the board without the need for voting. Whereas in Lezayre and Michael, nominations were asked for, but no residents put themselves forward for the role, meaning they still have vacant seats. Ramsey, Portaran, Port St Mary, Onken and a second for Patrick all held contested by-elections. None of these elections had a turnout of more than 50%, with the lowest being 18% in Ramsey last February. So why is voter turnout so low? It's well known that there's a lot of apathy on the island surrounding local authorities, which is shown when the elections roll around every 4 years. There are plenty of reasons this might be. Residents don't understand what they do, they're seen as less interesting than MHKs and Tynwald, or people really do have no interest in what decisions are being made in their areas. And from the previous election in 2021, only 7 local authorities had enough candidates to hold an election. Douglas had elections in 3 wards, whilst Lonnon had enough to warrant an election in Garff. There were 19 uncontested elections, and 7 of these needed by-elections to fill the available seats. That election was delayed due to COVID-19, and one of the main issues was voters may be self-isolating and were not able to go to the polls. I asked those we've heard from as to what they think about voter apathy and turnouts and how that may affect April's elections.
At the end of the day, it's a job that you get paid very little for, if that makes sense. And ultimately, people are busy. People have got lives, and we've got to be able to survive and pay your bills at the end of the day. And this is not a job that does that. So you have to factor that in. I mean, ultimately, we can't tackle it. It's the public that have got to tackle it. And we talk about the Facebook era, the moany keyboard warrior era. And I think, for me, I think if you're passionate enough to go onto Facebook or whatever it is you're going onto on a daily basis and to moan about something, then you should use that passion, use it to come in and see what you can do and see how you can change things. It's no good bashing the people who are trying. Bring up your civic pride, your pride in your community, and do something with that. If that doesn't encourage people to comment, I don't really know what will. It's a very rewarding job when you see the fruits of your labours. It is also incredibly frustrating, don't get me wrong. In the public sector, for example, you would just go out and do it and get it done. That doesn't happen here. You have to go through particular procedures, and that can be tough, but it is rewarding if you stick with it. And we've got council members that have been in here for many, many years, and there's a reason for that, because they're passionate. So I would say if you as a person have got time and you are passionate, then use that. Don't use it to be a keyboard warrior. Use it to be a council member.
I guess a lot of people think we don't maybe do a lot and there's not a lot of decisions to be made, but actually if you come along to the meetings and you see the variety of topics that are discussed on our agendas, there is actually quite a lot. And it's a little bit frustrating sometimes when you see comments on social media from people saying why the rate's going up or why isn't this being done? And a lot of that is explained and discussed within the meetings. So it would be really good to get more people involved, more people interested in local politics and local authorities, really just to do the best we can for our areas in the Isle of Man.
So how important is it that each little area is represented, and how important are they?
I feel quite strongly about this. I mean, obviously, Lonnon was its own ward, amalgamated into Garff about 10 years ago, I think it was now. But actually, we're really keen for Lonnon to keep its identity. And I think for the Isle of Man, keeping those individual areas and their identity is really important. I think the other thing that's really important when you come to local authority decisions, it's that local knowledge. So when you come to planning applications or issues on roads and highways, people who live in the area and understand the area are actually in a really strong position to make a decision than perhaps someone in an office in Douglas who perhaps don't have that local insight that the commissioners and the clerks have in their areas. And I think that's really apparent in Lonnon and also in Mackord and Laxey as well.
I think there are a couple of reasons that people probably just think that things will just be as they always have been and we can't change anything. Well, actually, that's not true. If you're in your area, and let's say take a play area or take improvement of some simple things, improvement of footpaths, whether you want the library open certain times, if you want a certain sailing club in Peel, you can have a real influence and much more than you think. So, for example, we were able to get Wi-Fi for a number of years that was free in Peel by talking to local companies. So there's much more that you can do that can be really positive than you think, and you can have a much more involvement. And it probably doesn't take as much time as people think as well. I think that's the thing that would deter people. It is something that you can bring as part of what you do. I know it's different, it's a daunting step, but actually it's a very rewarding one. Hopefully there'll be more people that will want to be one.
How important are they on the island?
I think they're vitally important. They are still a very important connection to the community. A lot of community groups, whether it's like we have Appeal Achievers or things like that, you're in contact with everybody in the community. And I think if you have everything at a national level, you break that link, that day-to-day link with real people on the ground. And I know it doesn't sound very far away, Douglas to Peel, but if there's an issue that is there and it's just been, if you like, imposed, then that is really bad, and it's really bad for the community. Whereas actually involving the community in everything you do is important. And I think, to be fair, I think some of that has been lost sight of. And like I said to you before, it'd be good for every MHK to have a year or two's experience as a commissioner to see what the real issues are on a local ground on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's really important for democracy, but also for our way of life.
Being a commissioner used to be a career path into being a member of the House of Keys, and for some this is still the case. But more often people bypass local politics and jump headfirst into Tynwald. In the current administration, 6 have previously sat on their local authorities' boards. Some people might be thinking of standing for their local authority with the aim of then progressing to Keys, but is this the right move? To summarise, there is no right way of joining a local authority, but both Russian MHK Michelle Haywood and Ramsey MHK Lawrie Hooper believe you get the best grounding in political knowledge by joining a board.
I was a commissioner in Ramsey for 5 years nearly, 2011 to 2016, when I was elected to the House of Keys. And the reason I stood in the first place was I wanted to do something positive really for the community, and I thought joining volunteer organisations would be a good approach, but I'm not really athletically inclined, shall we say, so a lot of the stuff that actually you can do on the island, it would have been quite difficult for me. But in terms of being a commissioner, I thought actually that was somewhere that my skill set would benefit, and I can actually be able to contribute something really to the town. And I found it really beneficial, actually. I found it really useful for me personally and professionally to help some of that development, but actually I really felt like I was making a difference locally, and that really stuck with me, I think.
What made you decide to make the jump to being an MHK?
When I was a commissioner, like I say, there were lots of things that you can do that are your responsibility, but ultimately quite a lot of the things that you deliver are set within kind of national frameworks and government policy, and there was quite a lot of friction between us as a local authority and what we were trying to do and some of the national restrictions that were imposed on us. So housing policy is a great example of that. We're still seeing issues today in terms of housing delivery, and a lot of that actually is controlled centrally. And so one of the things that I started to see after dealing with government a lot during my time as a commissioner, that a lot of the blockers, a lot of the challenges that we were facing needed to be dealt with at that national level, needed to be dealt with by Tynwald, by government, by MHKs. And it reached a point where I thought, you know what, I'm willing to try. And that's essentially it, really. I just thought there wasn't really a particular moment where it clicked, but I did think as the election was coming up, I thought, you know what, actually, this is something I think needs to be done. I think I'd be good at it. I think I'd be able to make a difference. And so I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And ultimately, it's not up to me to decide. It's up to the people of Ramsey to make their decision. And if they don't want me, that's fine. I'll happily keep serving as a commissioner, trying to fight the good fight from the inside there, as it were. But no, it was really just that frustration with some of the policies of central government and some of the restrictions that were imposed and some of the slow pace of change, I think, that you can see from the outside. You want things to be quicker. I accept it's not as easy as it looks, but someone's got to be willing to try. And ultimately, I really thought, well, if I'm going to stand up and complain about these things, I probably should put my money where my mouth is and try and do it myself.
How did you find it? You said you had all these skill sets coming in and you weren't athletically inclined. How did you find being a commissioner?
Difficult. In a word, there's a lot of competing demands on you as a commissioner. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding out there about what local authorities and commissions actually do compared to what government does, and I still see that in my role as an MHK today. So housing is a really good example of that. Local authorities predominantly are the ones that run our housing systems, and as an MHK I still get a lot of people coming and talking to me about local authority housing and related issues. So there's a bit of a misunderstanding there. There's also some real limitations on what you can and can't do as a commissioner. Again, flipping it on its head, there's loads of things you want to be able to do, but actually those responsibilities sit with the Department for Enterprise, Department of Infrastructure. They sit with national government, so it's a bit restrictive in some ways. But I always found that there were lots of things you could do. So despite some of those restrictions and despite some of those misunderstandings, it was always possible to get things done, to actually start driving some of the change and some of the improvements that you were looking for. But it is quite rewarding to be in that position, to be able to help, to be able to make decisions, to give back. But you have to be willing, I think, to commit some time and energy to it.
Would you recommend being a member of a local authority first? I know that is quite a common route. There's a few of you that have done it in government at the moment. Or would you recommend just going straight into being an MHK?
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? There's a study that's been done by the academics up at University College who've been looking at women who go into politics. And if you look at the first 10 women who ever went into the House of Keys, 9 out of 10 of them came from either the Education Council or a teaching or nursing background, and they'd all got either Education Council or local authority experience. And so I do think that that's a really good way to start understanding the mechanics about how government works. Certainly the way that meetings are run and minutes and action points are recorded, and understanding the balance sheets and the budgets for local authorities, really good training to sort of step up to doing something at a higher level. So I do think it's an interesting route. I don't think I'd ever thought of myself as a politician. I think I got involved because I firmly believe that if you're not part of the solution, you are probably still part of the problem. And I recognised that I'd got skills from my years in scientific research and academia, but in business as well, that would be helpful. And when you see things not going right, you think, okay, don't sit there and bleat about it. Get stuck in and make a difference. And I think that still followed me through when I came to national politics.
Did you become a commissioner then with the intention of being an MHK? Was that something that was even on your mind?
No, absolutely not. It was a commissioner just to help out with what was going on locally, to help out with Portsmouth, which is a fantastic village, but there were a few things I was unhappy with, and it was to try and direct some of that development that the local commissioners were trying to do at the time. So I never thought it would go beyond this, and in fact I was approached, and I think there is an element of that still goes on, that sometimes people have to be prompted to recognise what contribution they could make, and I do, certainly. I speak to people and I do suggest to them, think about standing and think about getting involved, because it's really easy to sit on the outside and carport to ring up the man in line and have a whinge. It's not so easy when you're sat around a table having to balance decisions with all of the facts and all of the competing factors at your fingertips to try and come to what's the best decision you can make going forward. And that, I think, is my frustration sometimes, is we can't share all of that information, but there is lots of it, and you have to work really hard at trying to make the best decisions.
So, what have we learned? That we need to be taking more interest in what our local authorities are doing, or that we need people to stand to make sure our local authorities are viable. Being in a local authority can be a good platform for people to have before deciding to be an MHK. There's a lot of opinions about the future of local authorities, whether we need 21, some would like to see 5+ Douglas, some people might see no need for them at all. But what is true is that come April there will be an election, and those local authorities need your votes to decide the future of your area, at least for the next 4 years. I'm local democracy reporter Emma Draper, and you've been listening to Island Life on Manx Radio. You can listen back to this programme at manxradio.com or by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider.